Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jamie Bauer, Director of Special Events at Marist and a graduate from the class of 2009. We're very excited to present this webinar today with host Clare Flemming from the Marist Archives and Special Collections. If you encounter any audio issues, you have the option to dial in by telephone. We've provided that number and code in the chat box. Due to the number of participants, we have muted all lines except for the host. We're going to reserve the chat option for any technical questions you might have and any general questions for the Marist staff who are listening. And please don't send any private messages to Claire, as she might not be able to see them. If you could use the Q&A feature for this, then we'll monitor that box and we'll direct your questions to the host at the end. There are several ways that you can view this presentation on your screen. If you hover over the top right corner of the video portion of your screen with your mouse, you'll see some small icons appear. The preferred choice for this webinar includes slides and video and is the side-by-side view. There will be a brief survey on your screen at the conclusion of the webinar. It should pop up in a new tab in your browser. If you have a minute, it would be extremely helpful for us to hear your feedback. Now I'd like to introduce our host. Clare Flemming works with John Ainsley in the Marist College Archives and Special Collections and teaches Marist Digital Humanities as an adjunct faculty member. Previously, she cared for the collections and researchers at the New York State Archives Storm King Center, Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia, the Explorers Club, and the American Museum of Natural History. Clare has an MS in Archives Management from Pratt Institute and an MA in Photographic Preservation and Collections Management from the University of Rochester. Clare, thank you so much for taking your time out of your schedule to join us today.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you, Jamie and Amy. And a shout out to my boss, John Ainsley, who put me up to this task. So thank you for that. I've been charged with making this light and breezy. It's not meant to be a tutorial at a master's level. It's just fun. So let's go. Jamie already introduced me. There's my email if you have any questions afterwards, claire.flemming@marist.edu. I'd love to hear from you. And this is archives and archivists are related to librarians and libraries. And I love this meme because it captures how so many people don't understand what we do in information science. So you can see there what my parents think I do, what my friends think I do, what my boyfriend thinks I do, what my patrons think I do, taxpayers, and then what I actually do. And in fact, archivists identify, preserve, and make available records of enduring value. That's what we do. Nothing mysterious about it. We identify, preserve, and make available records of enduring value. Some people think that archivists like to keep everything, and this is an example of one drawer where you have pieces of string worth saving, and another drawer where you have pieces of string not worth saving. I would argue archivists, through our training and reality, know that that's not the way to do things, but possibly, and I mean this in the most loving way, curators might store pieces of string in this manner. If you're an absolute nerd like some of us giving this presentation must be, you will get a kick out of this. This is a giant shredder that New York State Archives uses. It's a private company called Confidata, and they take all the recycled papers and those that are meant to be shred and siphon them down into this giant machine. So my point is, archivists do not keep everything. We know that not everything has enduring value, and a good fraction of records that are made should end up in a bale of shred like this. And in particular, Confidata is a New York State company, and a lot of that shred gets recycled and sold as toilet paper, paper towels, and other household products. So I love that. You're basically looking at the tools of our trade. So it doesn't have to be high-end, sophisticated electronic software. I'm showing you just the white gloves, of course, which we like to use when handling photographs. A bone folder, which is literally a piece of tool made out of cattle bone, but you can also buy them in Teflon. obviously pencils, and then an acid-free pen for certain times when you want permanent markers. And then the last implement on the right is my favorite. It's called a mini or micro spatula. And you just find it endlessly useful to flip through papers or take out staples. So again, we identify, preserve, and make available records of enduring value. And I argue that you can do this at home. That is my favorite product. I've never seen it in real life, but it's called Control Freak. And you just spritz it wherever you need a little bit of control. So to me, that's symbolic because archivists, we are control freaks. We're neat freaks and control freaks. We are concerned very much with intellectual control and physical control. Those two sorts of control drive what we do as archivists. A little bit of etymology for you. The core of record derives from the Latin for heart. Recordare is Latin for remember. And in essence, to record is to remember or know by heart. I just love knowing that. It's just, you know, it's not just a random word, but our profession revolves literally around the heart. So very briefly, let's get into some quick archival theory. And I will have to show this guy, T.R. Schellenberg, who's a prime mover in American archives in the mid-20th century. And we're just going to spend about half an hour discussing his theories. Oh, I'm just kidding. No way. This is not that kind of presentation. All you need to know about archival theory to organize your papers at home are two rules, two principles. Principle one that directs everything archivists do. We keep the records of one creator together. We do not mingle them with others. And I'll use an example, and this applies to your home projects. Although you are in charge, you have probably created your collections, so you can dictate what you want. But when we archivists work with papers that we're responsible for, that we don't create, we need to make sure that we don't jumble the papers in and amongst each other. And an example I like to use is, by comparison, librarians organize their materials by subject. Archivists organize by who created the record. So if you were to think of George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, they were both wartime presidents. And we would never, as archivists, take the papers of George Washington and Abe Lincoln and gamish them, nor would we pull all the war-related records of George Washington and mix them with Abe Lincoln's war records. No, 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 no. Provenance tells us the George Washington records stay together and they do not intermingle with Abe's or anybody else's. So that's rule number one. All you need to know about archival theory. Rule number two is original order. We archivists and you at home just respect and keep the order of papers used by those who created the records or collected the records or the source of the records. So when we encounter materials, I always like to think of a trunk in the attic that we inherit from great-grandmother, that you keep the order in which she herself put those records. And an example might be, you might find a love letter with a ticket stub from a play, with the playbill, maybe with a pressed flower, and with maybe, you know, a photograph of somebody who's not grandfather. So we would never, as archivists, want to bust those out and say, you know what, all love letters of my family go together. All pressed flowers go together. All playbills go together. The reason being, the original order that grandma kept those papers in, or great-grandma, gives us as archivists or family members insight into what was grandma doing. Looks like apparently she had a date with this person. He might have given her that flower. She might mention it in the letter, maybe, and obviously they went to this play together. So there's a lot of information that is gleaned only by respecting the original order of papers. And I will add, a lot of people ask, but what do you do if it's just a complete mess and there's no order? And I saw this phrase somewhere, it's not mine, but I love it. original order does not extend to original chaos. We don't have to respect chaos. And in the case where there is no evident original order, we archivists, and you as the family archivist, can impose order. Again, that's it. So key points for today's session: preservation of your records is key and attainable. And we'll talk about that. Very, very basic. You're going to order in a few supplies that we'll talk about. You will give yourself some space to work that's not crowded. Definitely no drinks on the table. Clear the pets away. Give yourself some space to work with your papers. And then give yourself some time to work with your papers. And I know for a fact, and I'm sure any other archivists out there would agree, starting a project like this probably not the most productive for the most people. So give yourself time and slowly chip away at it. You can do this, and I insist you will like it. So obviously, as addressed, we need in professional archives, cultural historical places, and family archives, we need space, resources, and time, as ever. So a couple words about what values, and I know a lot of people ask, how do you determine value? What's worth keeping? So we'll breeze through this quickly. Every record has a primary function. It has been created for a reason. And one example pops into mind, when you drop off your dry cleaning, you get a receipt for that black jacket. And gosh knows you want to pick that up when it's done, so you bring your receipt. Obviously, with electronic systems, receipt may not be as precious as it once was, but you know what I mean. So you want to, the primary reason for the creation of that receipt was to prove that you dropped off your black jacket and allow you to pick it up with payment. But then records can move through their life cycle, and when they're no longer needed for their primary reason, they can have a secondary life, a second life. I would argue in very few cases does that dry cleaning receipt ever make it to the archives. Probably doesn't have a lot of secondary value. I know of some archives in New York where the collection of the person was so famous that they kept every single dry cleaning record and every bit of chewing gum wrappers. So that's a different approach. But jumping into the secondary reasons for, values in recorded information, when you're looking through your papers, you just wonder to yourself, does this prove something? Is it evidential? Is there evidence in this document that something took place? Or is it informational? Or is the value intrinsic? It's just a cool thing to have. Is there financial value? Is the item rare or scarce or of a certain age that it just merits keeping? And sometimes that could devolve to a format. One example being, if you find in your family papers a daguerreotype, which is one of the very earliest types of photographs, usually in a case with a velvet lining and a glass cover. If you find a daguerreotype, just automatically, they're rare, they're scarce, they're old, and their format makes them worth keeping. Not even, who cares who's in the photo? It might be a family member, which would be great. But just, that's my point about secondary value. And then we've got 6 reasons for recording information, which I've illustrated with my favorite comic, mutts.com. So when you think about this too, when you're going through papers, why the information was recorded, and there's the personal reason. A diary is a perfect example of that. You write it for yourself. Social reasons, so these could be anything with more than one person, like those old church cookbooks that I remember from the 80s, and minutes of a ski club or whatever. So something that people do together, they like to record information. Economic is a big one. That's any time money is exchanged or it's about money, such as Mooch the cat ordering his favorite latte. Money will be exchanged. So that's an economic reason. Legal reason, anything to do with the law. And as you can imagine, there are a lot of records revolving around the law. New York State Archives holds a huge number of these legal records, and they're pored over all the time by scholars. Symbolic, there's symbolic reasons, and I'll get to that with a little more detail, and instrumental. So that might be weird to think about, and my image of Mooch behind a marching band doesn't really clarify that. But let's look here. This is an image that I shot of a blueprint that a researcher was consulting in the light. I just thought it was very pretty. Blueprints or renderings, architectural plans are instruments. They're instrumental. They are an instrument to make something else happen. So they're not just drawn for sheer beauty, although they have that too. Their primary value is as an instrument. Does that make sense? And then this, I think, is for anyone who's been lucky enough to experience this in New York City, you'd know a mile away. When you approach your car and see a folded piece of orange paper, you are looking at symbolic document. That is a parking ticket, parking violation. And it's orange so that you can see it a mile away and you can't lose it in your papers at home. But it's also an instrument. It itself is an envelope to be an instrument so that you, in your violation, can write a check, stick it in the symbolic orange envelope as an instrument to get that thing mailed. So there's many reasons, and there's many more reasons for recording information. And this beautiful map is in the New York State Archives. And that is a map of Poughkeepsie in 1798, I believe. So a map is an instrument. It will guide people from place to place. Not only it can mention land borders, maps are their own thing. Absolutely fascinating history and subject. I have a book in my library called An Introduction to Map Librarianship, and it's easily an inch and a half thick, and that's just an introduction. But I will point out on this top right-hand corner, let's zoom in just a little bit, that's a completely unnecessary flourish. So that is symbolic as well. It says Town of Poughkeepsie in Dutchess County. And there's to the right, there's a ship, and it's most likely the Hudson River. And we can see some 18th century people, and they put down their work for the afternoon to chit chat and point to a slab of rock. And we can see some fishing baskets. And so all of that is totally unnecessary, but certainly lovely. And then another important thing to consider, this is for, again, from the New York State Archives, there are minimum criteria for off-site storage, but I like it because it applies to even our family archives. You need to make sure your place is, if possible, temperature and relative humidity control, that there's fire protection, there's access control and perimeter security, minimal daylight, no pests, the ability to elevate collections 4 inches off of the floor, and that's to keep dust and soot from accumulating, which itself attracts pests. And ideally, you'd be located above a floodplain. So we've got a whole bunch of supplies to talk about because we'll refer to them. Gaylord is another New York State organization. Gaylord is up in Syracuse. It's a brand that I always go to. I'm not saying anything about the other suppliers out there, but this has just been the one I go to for decades now. I've never been less than 100% satisfied with Gaylord. It's gaylord.com. And I'm jumping here because they have on their website a whole section called Family History and Collectors. So that's kind of nice. And here's some resources they have, just some basic, very basic Preservation 101 for the family photos. Very good to know. Here is a glimpse of one tiny fraction of the 26 miles of records that are held in the New York State Archives. And I'm going to see if I can jump quickly to a little video. If not, I'll jump right back. But you can notice the floor, the lowest shelf is off the floor. And every shelf, every item on the shelf is in a box. Every box has a lid. It protects from dust. It protects from light. Even in this particular case, the lights are not on unless the area is being walked through. So lots of protection in place. quick check to see if this little video works. Stay with me. It's a good one if it works. This is 35 seconds of a tour of the stacks of the New York State Archives, and I don't think people are likely to get the chance to see this, and there's no sound. Well, it's just my boots clomping along.
Claire, it actually didn't switch over, so we just see the photo of the archive still. It looks like the screen didn't share.
Okay, I'll just jump back if it didn't work. Thank you. Thank you for that. Let me go back to my presentation. Full screen mode. And here we are. Okay, thank you, Amy. Uline is another company I like. They're very efficient, very fast. What you're looking at here are we call cubic foot boxes, also called record storage boxes. They'll hold probably, depending on how much stuff you have in a folder, anywhere between 30 and 70 folders in a box. They can weigh up to 40 or 50 pounds. So when you see all these boxes like this, these record boxes, those are going to be heavy, and it's quite an effort to work with them. Archives is a very physical line of work, and people think we just sit around and read all day, but we're also schlepping boxes and moving materials, and all in the name of providing this to researchers. But I like this Uline. There's their phone number. I buy these quick for home, Uline quick file boxes. They're cheap, they fold flat, they ship. It's just so nice to have around. Back to Gaylord, what you see here on the left, these are called document cases. And if your budget allows, these are lovely to have. They're about 5 inches wide, and they hold upright folders with documents in them. Those documents could be photographs. Those documents could be any paper-based, or even, drop a CD in there in a folder if you need to. And down at the bottom is the ones I'm most familiar with, the blue ones. They're the cheapest, at $9 a pop if you order 10. And then the black is pretty sleek and beautiful. They're almost $12 a pop if you order 10. And same thing with the cream colored ones. So aesthetics comes into play a little bit. Really nice to have for your most precious material. They also come in legal size as well. The other item minimally that's really good to have for working at home on your home papers are classic full 1-inch tab acid-free letter size file folders. They're 100 folders per pack, and just under $30. These are indispensable, really. I like the 1-inch full tab because what I'm indicating here is a lot of real estate where you can write whatever you want to indicate the contents of that folder. And finally, just a word about polyester sheets. The image shows a woman sealing a document using a bone folder in between sheets of what we used to call Mylar, sometimes called Melanex. Here it's called archival polyester sheets. 3 mil means the weight of it. It's thin, it's flexible. And this is perfect for storing photographs. You can buy the roll, like you see next to her, or you can buy pre-cut to whatever size you like. You can buy the kind that you slide a photo in, or the kind that you peel open and let rest a photo in, all kinds of supplies. So here's me with a random sample of my family archives. This should look very familiar to anyone who's in charge of or stuck with family papers. I'm not really going to talk further about non-precious materials like your tax records. You probably know you can shred, I believe it's every 7 years. So after 7 years, just shred them, get rid of them. They don't have enduring value. But stuff like this deserves to be looked through to see what might have enduring value. I have no idea who this lady is who's in my family photos, but it'd be interesting to find out. And notice a little box to my left on the floor. This is how I work. I do the keep, toss, and shred piles. So that box is ready for anything I want to shred. The keep, I will refolder, I will put in new boxes, I will organize, I will label. And in doing so, you gain a lot more space for your precious stuff. And it feels good, back to comfy data, it feels really good to shred materials that you no longer need.
Claire, we have a question pertaining to the boxes. What about plastic tubs? You've mentioned paper or cardboard.
Oh yeah, paper or cardboard is I think a little cheaper. Plastic is perfectly fine if it's a so-called inert plastic, and Gaylord does sell those. They're called, well, I think they're corrugated plastic boxes. They look just like these document cases, but they're plastic. And those are great. Kind of sad. They're sad in that we archivists know our records are going to be stored near a pipe that's going to leak, so we might as well use plastic. Not a bad idea. Great question. I hope I answered it. This could look like insert whoever you are, put yourself on that couch with those boxes. I'm sure your family papers will resemble something like this. This is some kind of certificate of participation that my great uncle received, and I'm showing you this because it's back to symbolic value. It's just like a diploma. We love our symbolic documents. So a diploma has the calligraphy, the seal of the college. I'm sure every graduate of Marist College has their diploma probably nearby, and as you should. And just it could just be typed up, but we love the symbolism. So instantly when I see that kind of symbolism, I'm like, huh, okay, that's probably important, probably has enduring value. Not necessarily, but probably. And just some more random stuff that your documents will look like that. The document with all the handwriting is called a diary and log. And if you encounter these things, since they're little booklets, I'll hold up this notebook as an example. You want to store anything with a spine down in a folder in a box. It's different. Now in a library, we expect them upright and you pull carefully from the edges of the spine. But in the archives, we want the spine down so that gravity does not pull the text block away from the spine. So spine down in archives, in a folder, put all the labeling you want on that folder. So it doesn't matter what the spine says, because sometimes you think, oh, I need to read the spine. No, you don't. Put whatever you want on the folder, spine down, and you can sleep at night. It's a good feeling. Here's another batch of stuff in my family archives. That's a lovely piece of work that I evidently created in the early 1970s. So my blue-green phase, I guess. And then in going through, I had other phases. And at some point, it's like, first of all, I don't even want this stuff, but this is my dad's paper, so it's cute that he kept it. I'm not going to keep it. And in fact, for demonstration purposes, I threw 3 of them into the shred pile, or toss. And I will point out, I didn't even know this till the picture was taken, that after I threw those items in the shred box, I stood there smugly with my hands on my hips and was very proud of myself, which you can see in the photo. And for laughs, and I don't think this has enduring value either, I would definitely get rid of this, but I can tell you this is my brother's work in 1977. His efforts at creating characters from Star Wars. Some are pretty recognizable. I see a couple R2-D2s. He didn't quite get the stormtroopers, and I'm seeing a Darth Vader somewhere in there. Kind of cute. I would probably send them to him, and I don't need to ever see them again. So your boxes could look like this. At least if they're boxed up, they are somewhat protected. Recently, I had a small leak in my own basement where, of course, my own archives are stored. And the good thing was, even just those cardboard box lids really protected the contents from getting wet, because I was there able to act quickly. But if I didn't have lids, I can't even imagine the damage that would have been done. So this is what your collections might look like. And every type of box, some like this one over here, I hate these. These are hanging file folders. You can see them here too. they have no business being in our permanent records. They're lined with metal bars, so they're very dangerous to the collections. They never fit right in the box, and you will always get your fingers trapped when you try to work with them. You also don't know what to expect. Your family papers may have unexpected media in various conditions. So these are things to know about if you find some precious archival film in your family. And there's usually like the original folder, materials within. This is called processing. This is when we sort the contents of a box and start to understand what's there while respecting provenance and respecting original order. So there are times when, as we talked about, you need to do a little refinement, but certainly this batch of letters was together. So I'm keeping them together, even if I'm sorting them by date within a folder. You want to flag what might be of interest to family members or researchers in the case of cultural heritage institutions. That is a early 1960s plan for the idea of the World Trade Center. Kind of weird, random thing to have. I talked about transforming each folder. So you've got a clean, nice folder. You put whatever information you want on there. This says, top one says waterfront clippings 1960 to 1967. So you put a date on that folder is helpful. Maybe something about what's in it, who created it. And then the nice thing, a very nice feeling, is just the debris from the old. As you're sorting through, you transfer the contents of your family archives into nice, clean, new, acid-free folders and toss the old. What this is a nasty piece of rubber band. A lot of people use rubber bands to keep stuff together, but through time, they will solidify, they will break, they will stick, parts of them will stick to the document. And evidently, being made of rubber, they create H2SO4, which is, I believe, sulfuric acid. So that's a lot of badness on your family paper, so you want to toss that. And this is just an example of a box that I've half finished. So it's half processed, and already, and to answer some questions about preservation, we're looking at it. By transferring these items into clean, new, acid-free folders, you are physically protecting them. You are mechanically supporting these documents. They're no longer slumped in oversized, loose containers or stuffed in boxes that are bursting like this one. So that's as easy as preservation can be. Of course, it can be a lot more sophisticated, but it's at minimum that simple. And you know where all of this is heading. This is just plain junk. We do try to remove metal from our family archives if it's appropriate. A lot of paper clips rust and are stronger than the paper, so they're damaging. Scotch tape will never last, so it will become sticky. And what happens is it stains the document and the stickiness wears away and the tape falls off, so you get nothing good out of Scotch tape. So you can throw all that away. And here's a really lovely collection of, I know, is it weird to take pictures of this? I don't think so. Just, it's very rewarding. This represents all the debris from a collection that archivist Kathleen Bunk up at the New York State Museum, she's working on her professional archives and transferred material out of unpleasant, inappropriate containers. Like 3-ring binders are really pretty bad for valuable papers because they will pull against the rings. And other highly acidic stuff. We can see here, it looks like maybe somebody else owns that bin on top, so I'm sure that was returned to the post office. So it's just a nice feeling. And also, when you store your papers in folders in appropriate boxes, you gain so much space. And look, this is what she did. She transferred field notes from an early state geology survey from nasty, oversized boxes that, I shouldn't say nasty, it is what it is. Remember, time, staff, resources, space, these things don't all come at once. So if somebody did a nice job trying to box the papers using what they had, that's fine. But if we can do better, it can look like this. And this is an example of duplicates. If you have 1,000 wedding invites from Uncle George's wedding, you don't need to keep them all. We archivists say we like to have 2 of everything, if possible, but certainly not more than that, unless there's some real key reason to have more than that. So this shows you, I think I'm seeing 27 inches of material that once I winnowed out and kept 2 of everything, you know, it's all the rest of that was discarded or recycled. So you could do that at home too. Not only with not valuable stuff, but with duplicates and triplicates and multiplicates. So finally, this is just what we endeavor to get our spaces to look like. Beautiful document cases, labeled, secure, ready for storage and access. Okay, who here wants to digitize everything? Not me. This is an example of a floppy disk, which some of you might remember. And clearly the archives, whatever they were, the originals were destroyed because it's good. We can digitize it now and save it forever and ever on this 3 or 5 inch floppy disk. Now, just to be honest, I created this as a spoof just to make a point, but that happens all the time when people think, oh, it's okay, we've digitized it. We digitized it in 1998, it's fine. And obviously there's standards for digitization. This is not that talk, but I will point you to some resources about that. And just looking back at the state archives, look at all this material. Not everything, not every single item in every single box deserves to be scanned. Clearly, the decisions were made based on state government policy and the wisdom of the state archivists. Everything in these boxes has been kept through a process called appraisal. They've decided these have certain value or certain obligations to store, but not everything deserves digitizing. I'm going to zoom in a little bit on this because I know it's an important topic for some. Let's see if I can do that. Well, I'll have to just quickly jump out and get nice and big. Will digitization solve my problem? And we'll just go through a couple of these. Do you want to digitize your entire archives? Yes. Really? Yes, really. And we see an upset statue. Okay, we archivists don't think about that you should digitize everything. Do you want to digitize your entire archives? No. Do you need to save the digital files forever? Yes. Well, maybe not forever. Do you have a digital preservation plan? I have some external drives. Does that count? Or no, what's a digital preservation plan? Or yes, I do have a digital plan. Do you want to share the files with the world? Yes. Do you have a website where you can put the files? I'll figure that out after I digitize. Now you have problems. So I am of the school, clearly, not everything's worth digitizing. And when you talk about resources, sorry about that, we can't forget that digitizing, the actual act of pressing the button to scan a document, is the least of the project. There's so much in terms of preparation, hardware, software, preservation for the digital files, expense, who's going to pay for all this, and migration when it becomes old. So digitization really has to be, should be, for a specific reason, such as maybe with family photos. Wow, it would be really cool to digitize or scan. I'm going to say scan now. Scan these and share them with the family or post them to social media. Yes, absolutely. Keep the original, scan as you like, do whatever you like with them, but we can't expect these digital files to last forever. I mean, right now, I cannot even access CDs in my home in the year 2020. I have a lot of photos on CDs. So it's just a point I want to make that archivists sometimes say, and we have been for years, facing the tide of digitization, the tide of demand for digital materials. And we're standing at the edge of the ocean, looking at that wave coming in, and we're holding a towel. So we're ready, but we're nowhere up to scale. And that's, I'm speaking for smaller places and for family archives. Okay, back to next up, and we're almost done, resources. I want to point out imagepermanenceinstitute.org. It's a function of Rochester Institute of Technology, and they have free webinars about photographs and movies and digitizing. Just looking in there recently, I saw they've got a nice free recorded webinar on 20th century photographic materials, processes, and technologies. So anyone listening to this talk is probably bound to have a lot of 20th century photographs. So we could learn through this webinar that's free how best to identify them and preserve them. But again, at a minimum, photographs upright, even an album, either flat in a nice clamshell box, as we call them, or in a folder and upright, if it's well supported, are fine. The Graphic Atlas is another piece of the Image Permanence Institute, and I want you to be aware of it, graphicatlas.org. So I will zoom in and show you a feature where you can look at any type of photographic process. I've picked the chromogenic film, what we everyday people think of as color photographs. So this is a Kodachrome slide, and it shows what it should look like, and that's pretty much about real life size. And then you can look at it in different ways. We can zoom in and see the image of the slide. This has a 90-degree raking light, so the light is coming from one side and shows you what it looks like. This shows you straight on, the light is just going straight into the slide, and you can see a lot of information there. You can see where the gelatins, the boundaries, we lose all color, but you can still see a lot. And then you can see the backside. And, you know, depending on your ability to read script, we can see that these guys are standing with their umbrellas, which we knew anyway. But it'd be nice to have a date on there. And then you can also see a side view, microscopic side view of that slide. We can see on the bottom, the paper cellulose acetate support, which is the clear film, and then multiple dye images through gelatin emulsions. It's quite mysterious and quite chemical. And then you can see a thin, thin, thin lacquer on the front. So really have a good time with Graphic Atlas. They also have video tutorials and just a great resource. I would be remiss if I didn't mention James Riley's Care and Identification of 19th Century Photographic Prints. 19th century. So if your collection spills over into 19th century, this is a great resource. And it's got a wonderful fold-out chart with a close-up of like a 30 times magnified close-up of every type of main image that you might encounter. I saw one on Amazon today for $75. It's a paperback. And I've seen them as much as $300 online for this book. But I was lucky in that I found one for 50 cents ages ago at a garage sale. One other resource, totally helpful for anyone listening here, Documentary Heritage and Preservation Services for New York, aka DIPSNY. DIPSNY is designed to be a service of education and resources for cultural history, cultural institutions throughout New York, but equally the same information applies to our family archives. So I urge you to check out DIPSNY, a rich resource of recorded webinars on all aspects of collection care. And at this point, I would absolutely encourage you to check out DIPSNY for anyone who had questions about audiovisual collections and digital preservation, scanning, metadata. DIPSNY has many, many, many webinars. They're entirely free. Two of note, One was on archival ethics and one was on accessioning, but I just, because I gave them, so they're not really of note, but a little plug for Dipsney, they're fantastic. Back to Gaylord, you could download this 56-page guide to collections care. I've included the PDF URL right there. But it's really nice. It breaks it down, very basic, how to care for paper, photographs, textiles, and books. Nice free resource from Gaylord. And at that point, I will acknowledge you and thank you so much for spending your time with me today. And back to you, Jamie.
So Claire, we have quite a bit of questions that came in throughout the presentation and also ahead of time. So if you're ready, I'm going to start shooting them at you.
Yes.
So we've got, I'm going to start, I tried to organize them by topic. So is there a way to tell if a plastic tub from Home Depot or another chain store is okay to use? I've heard that plastics include PVC that has a certain smell.
Very good question. There is a way. One easy way is to buy from an archival source if you have the funds. The V in PVC, the V stands for vinyl. That is to be avoided if we want to preserve our paper. However, I myself have some, Home Depot bins in the basement that are storing all of my old VHS. I'm not saying it's perfect, but for me, for my possessions, I'm okay with it. But yes, vinyl is to be avoided. There are other, polyester is good, but polyvinyl is not. And there is a smell. There is like that weird, like almost rubbery smell to be avoided.
Okay. So a follow-up to that question would be, do you recommend staying away from supplies from places like Staples or similar stores? Or would you be able to find things at those stores as well?
Excellent question. I love going down the supply aisle of Staples. I just love that. I'll buy one of everything. But we do need to be aware if it's just for our temporary use or for long-term family valuable storage. So if you're looking for something like, just say the folders, you can buy really cheap manila folders at a Staples. Some will be brightly colored. There's no guarantee. In fact, they're very likely to be made out of high acid wood pulp, like pulp fiction. We know the term. It's wood pulp that makes our paper mostly. So you look for acid free. Ever since the late 1980s, paper companies, to stay current, have made their reams of paper acid free, but you have to look for it. So have fun, knock yourself out, but if you want to preserve something forever, it's got to be acid free.
Great. So a follow-up to that then, since you mentioned wood pulp, is we had someone ask the question, what's the best way to slow down deteriorating wood pulp-based papers and other publications such as school yearbooks?
Excellent. Well, the very best way is, I should say, the minimum way, which I consider the best in terms of resources. Just like we talked about, get yourself the acid-free folder in a nice sturdy box. Drop your school papers into the folder and put them in the box and make sure they're nice and firmly supported, and close that lid, put it on a nice dry shelf, and you're good to go. The acid-free folder itself will prevent acid from migrating from other materials into the schoolwork, but the schoolwork, we're stuck with acid. It's called inherent vice, and we're just stuck with the acid in the wood pulp. There is a very expensive approach where you can buy calcium carbonate and mix it up with water and spray it page by page. And about 10 years ago, that amounted to $1 a page. So that's called buffering. I don't think it's really common for family members to do that, but just acid-free folders in a nice dry box.
Great. So another one we have about storage is, are there archival boxes that are up to par for stacking on the bottom floor of your library?
Yes, you can, the ones I showed you from Uline claim stack 5 to 7 boxes high, which is not ideal if you're pulling those boxes. And the one you need for a researcher is the bottom one, because it's a lot of work and it's exhausting. But yes, if it's for your own home storage, you can box up either with Gaylord cubic foot boxes or U-line, and they should be fine. Just make sure they're nicely on top of each other. Sometimes people will do 2 boxes oriented one way and then 2 another. So that distributes the weight a little better, because you don't want, and we do see it all the time, one corner of the lowest box gets crushed and then everything starts to fall. But yes.
Great. Do you have any storage tips for storing fabric or yarn for a special topic?
Well, my go-to storage tip is always, I don't care what it is, be it a christening dress, is the acid-free folder and a box. But textiles are their own thing with their own line of work. I think textiles are best stored flat as possible. No folds. So folds are to be avoided, because the fold is where the item weakens, especially if it's a double fold. So the flatter, the better. And then for very large items, they're often rolled around tubes, very gently rolled around. Archival acid-free tubes with all kinds of archival acid-free muslin or so. So you can roll as well.
Great. All right, I'm going to get into a couple scanning questions for you. We've got a question that they asked, is there a high-speed, high-volume technique for scanning documents that you can suggest?
Oh, I'm certain there is, and no, I can't suggest it, but I can ask somebody. I'm sure the New York State Archives, for example, has to deal with that all the time. I don't have an answer, but I can look into it. Perfect.
If photos get transferred to disks, how long is their storage life?
Wow. Well, I remember when disks came out, or were already out, it was bragged like the last 500 years. You know, it's great. You know, they'll never scratch. And we all know that's not true. So it depends. And part of my thinking is, as an archivist, I agree with the following, which is digitization is excellent for access and can be meaningless for preservation. So you've got the original document. If you do have an original photo album, these things last 150 years. They can. The disc that I have from a trip in 2006, I can't open it. I don't know if it's safe, readable. So I'm not a big fan of trusting in all things digital in terms of preservation.
Okay. So then we have a question. When does one just scan? Can tag and put into multiple electronic folders, and retrieval is a lot easier? So they're asking, when does someone get to a point where they would just scan their archives?
That's up to their resources. Assuming, again, you can scan just to scan because it's fun, but to me that's no different than photocopying. Like why? And if you scan everything, then you've created, for every object, you've created a digital object that itself needs care and love and TLC. And so if you wanted to scan everything or a certain collection, what was the, I think I lost my thread there.
It was, so they're saying, is there a point where you would just scan and tag your items into multiple electronic folders for easier retrieval?
Absolutely. I think that's a personal decision. You might say, all the wedding photos I will do, period. Or childhood photos or whatever.
Okay. Then we have a question. Do you have a recommendation for a high quality scanner?
I don't. I'm not an expert in that material at all, but I again encourage anyone with those questions. The DIPSNY website, dhpsny.org, has experts who've given webinars that are free. So there's a lot, I just searched today, there's a lot of audiovisual material up there and scanning plans and digitization plans. So please check into that.
Great. What is the best way to digitize and store physical photographs? A computer hard drive, an online cloud, a specific website, etc.
Eeks. Well, back to resources. I know a lot of institutions are digitizing and uploading to, I guess you'd call it the cloud, with physical, with hard drive backups. I've heard, and I can't remember the source, but ideally a digital record is supposed to be backed up 5 different ways. So for redundancy, or 5 different places. So if Chicago has a record, they should make sure it's in Albany. If Albany has a record, they should make sure it's in Poughkeepsie, and so forth. But that's hard and not really family relevant. So okay. I don't have an answer again with the scanning. Sorry.
It's okay. Let's see. We've got, what do you think is the best way to store home videos? I think they're going to be transferring them from mini cassettes. So they want to know where they could transfer them over to.
Again, that's another question for resources. And I know there's a lot of companies who do that for family archives. I don't know the quality. I don't even know what to recommend, but I drive by them around here in Ulster County, like, we'll transfer all your VHS onto DVDs. And I just don't know. Sorry.
That's okay. What I'll have Claire do is provide me with that link that she mentioned before. And when we send out the email with the link for the recording, I can include that as well.
Great.
So then we've got, let's see, I'm going to skip over the digital questions and I'm going to go to, how does one assign a value of keeping papers that they wrote over 50 years ago at Marist College?
Great question. If it's for you and you love it, that's all you need to do. If you like it, you keep it. It reminds me of Marie Kondo's phrase, does it spark joy? If it sparks joy, then keep it. If it's, something you're very proud of or want to publish, of course, that's a different reason to keep it, get it out into the light of day. And how do you preserve it? Just same exact way, papers in folders in boxes. And I say that would be really exciting to see, and maybe you'll consider sharing some of that with us at the archives. Just an idea, just a question.
So this person has recently been gifted a large number of old photographs from 1920s, between 1920 and 1940. They're going to scan them, but they want to know what the best way to physically store them is.
Excellent. That's the best of both worlds. Are they in albums, did you say? Albums?
She didn't say if they were in albums.
Well, if they're loose or just loose tacked on pages, those can go right in the folders. You can get really deep into photographic supplies of high-end, gorgeous, acid-free portfolios and so forth. So again, I would recommend gaylord.com. Get a sense of what's out there, what meets your budget. But minimally, you're doing the right thing, just preserving that album. Just in a folder, labeled on the folder, in a box, done is done.
Perfect. Quickly back to storing fabric and photo albums. Someone asked if storing them in a cedar chest that belonged to her mother, are they safe there?
I know that's the previous way to keep insects out was through cedar because they don't like the smell. I don't think wooden storage today is considered archival. But for you, you might love the fact that this dress was stored in grandma's cedar chest. So you could be careful and wrap that material in some kind of buffer to prevent it from touching the wood. But wood also famously off gases, so there's all kinds of chemical changes in a closed wooden chamber that I can't talk about, but just, we always have to be careful of wood. It's not an archive's friend, to be honest.
Okay. Someone has a lot of World War II photos that have curled. They want to know if there's a way to uncurl them safely.
There is, absolutely. It's called dehumidification, dehumidifying. And there are links about it. I know National Archives and Library of Congress and the National Park Service have discussions about this. So it's in a nutshell, and don't follow my words, be sure to read an expert, but you would take the curled photographs and put them in a chamber like a an open plastic bucket that is in itself in a larger plastic bucket with a little water on the bottom. I mean, it's a humidifier. Sorry, not dehumidifier. It's a humidifier. So you've got water in the bottom, your bucket with your dried, curled photos, and then a cap on so that the humidity can begin to relax those curls. And it will happen. And then as they relax, you unfurl them gently and place some barrier over the photos and weight down the item for, it could be weeks or months. But please look up the humidifying chamber for old photographs.
Perfect. Is there any way to preserve photos that people have hanging on the wall in their home to keep them secure, I guess?
Number one, make sure it's never hit by a beam of sunlight, because sun UV will irretrievably damage the photograph. If you have the resources, you could take that photograph to some place like the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts in Philadelphia, or the Northeast Document Center in Amherst, Massachusetts, or private conservators who can take that photo out of the old frame and frame it anew in thoroughly modern museum archival quality, no UV transmission through the glass, no acid touching anything. If you really go nuts, they can make a little micro chamber and keep the oxygen at a certain level and so forth. So there are definitely ways to preserve. So number one is make sure there's no sunlight, and I would add no light, really, no UV light beaming on it ever. So if you have it in a setting, make sure your lights are UV filtered.
Great. What are some important things to know / consider about giving collections to nonprofits like historical societies?
Great question. Number one, it has to be negotiated with the archivist. So we always encourage a back and forth, the donor and the archivist. That way the archivist can explain what rules and rights that they expect, and the donor has a chance to say that as well, such as, I want to give you all of my diaries, but they must not be made publicly available until 10 years after I die. So there's all kinds of negotiations between the archivist repository and the donor. And this is all negotiated in a legal contract called a deed of gift agreement. And the Society of American Archivists has a great passage about the deed of gift agreement and what to expect, why donate and why not to donate.
Great. So I'm going to give you one more question just because we're running out of time. And then any questions that we didn't get to answer, I'm going to keep together and I'm going to put them in a folder so we can, maybe you and I can talk and we can include them. So we did have a couple people ask about your feelings on the cloud and storing things in the cloud and what you think about that. So I want to end with that one.
Sure. My gut reaction personally is it seems to be oftentimes hackable. We hear about that. I mean, everything's hackable. So there's a certain amount of trust in putting your stuff on the cloud. A certain amount of privacy concerns, like how many devices are synced up, who else can see it. But also it's the way right now. It's the best we've got. Also, in many cases, it's expensive. In many cases, you get what you pay for. So I know a lot of repositories use the cloud and are so far so good, happy. I don't really have beyond that experience.
All right. So in consideration of everyone's time, like I said, we're going to wrap it up, but I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today and for keeping the Marist Alumni Association in your life during this time. And I'd also like to thank Claire for spending her afternoon with us and sharing her expertise. A full recording of this presentation will be available in the next few days on the Virtual Opportunities page on the Marist Alumni website. We've posted a link for that in the chat. And thank you so much to everyone. And again, we'll have the full presentation that we're going to send out in that link as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Claire.
Bye-bye.